If you're not already subscribed to this YouTube channel, go ahead and hit the subscribe button now, along with the bell icon so you can be notified whenever a new video is posted. And if you're already subscribed, check and make sure that YouTube hasn't unsubscribed you. And of course, be sure to give the video a like, as well as share it on your social media. The white supremacists hate that. And now, the Sunday address. We have a lot of black folks who are still pining away, waiting for that mythical black fill-in-the-blank alliance to materialize, and they're shocked and surprised that it still hasn't happened after all these decades. And they're also just flabbergasted that we're having a number of people of color using us to score points with the reactionary racist right. There's a lot of people out there who have these cozy relationships with white supremacy, and some of the biggest supporters of white supremacy and biggest funders of it are not classified as white at all. And this kind of getting close to white power is very much seen among immigrants to the U.S. For a long while, the U.S. didn't allow immigrants into the country in any appreciable numbers, but thanks to the efforts of black Americans who thought that because white supremacists didn't consider people from Asia or south of the border to be white, that these people would naturally understand the threat of white supremacy, we advocated for them to be allowed into the country. And then a large number of them promptly made common cause with white supremacy. Here's an example of one of those cozy relationships. This is Jacob Wohl. Long story short, this guy is basically what Christopher Rufo was. The only difference is Rufo, with some help from the Manhattan Institute, managed to find a benefactor and grift himself something resembling gainful employment. Jacob Wohl, on the other hand, hasn't been quite so fortunate. Wohl tries to be a right-wing provocateur, and he does all kinds of over-the-top extreme stunts, like accusing former FBI Director Robert Mueller of sexual assault. There's a lot of stupid money to be made off of the rubes on the white right. You got the state still giving out mental health disability checks, so these racists have plenty of money they can give to right-wing nuts of their choice. So with all this stupid money floating around, there's a lot of weasels trying to see how much of it they can get for themselves. This is what fuels the cottage industry and phony white outrage, which has always been the entire foundation of the conservative movement and the Republican Party. Now, what people like Jacob Wohl and his partner in crime, Jack Burkman, have been trying to do is to parlay their trolling and attention-whoring stunts into what they hope will be finally some regular paying gigs as operatives for the Republican Party. Jacob Wohl's main claim to fame was having gotten a retweet from Donald Trump back when the Orange Man was still on Twitter, and managing to get his picture taken with Trump while he was on the campaign trail. Since then, he's tried to play off of his blink and you'll miss it contact with Trump and stretch his 15 seconds of fame far as he can. So that means engaging in the kind of non-stop troll tactics like the kind you see from Steven Crowder and others. In his book, the only bad publicity is none at all. So along with his co-conspirator Jack Burkman, Jacob Wohl tried to get some traction by attacking Democrats like Elizabeth Warren and others during the Trump years. The high point of this political man-bites-dog showboating was when in 2020 Wohl and Burkman ran a voter suppression scheme where they sent out tens of thousands of automated robocalls to black neighborhoods across the country. When they sent out their robocalls, the messages would claim to be from an organization called the 1599 Project, obviously meant to be an insulting takeoff of the 1619 Project. I guess for the white right, this is what qualifies as clever. These robocalls told black residents that if they registered to vote, their information could be used by the CDC to force them to get the COVID vaccine. It could also be given to the police to pursue them for warrants, or given to debt collectors to chase them for unpaid bills. Well, Jacob Wohl and his family ought to know all about debt collectors. USA Today reported that Jacob's father, a sleazy shyster lawyer, has been pursued for unpaid tax liens at least a dozen times since 1995. So the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. Basically, Jacob Wohl and his pals took every negative thing in their own lives and then projected it onto black people. And how well did their intimidation campaign pan out? How accurate was their knowledge of the black community? Black voters turned out in droves in 2020 to vote the Orange Man out of office. The political lesson here is, if you offer nothing, you'll get nothing. And before I go any further, would you like to know where Wohl and Burkman were particularly active? In the state of Ohio. That's where they were finally prosecuted last year. Now, those of you who watch my crime report know that 2 days ago I told you about the latest mass murder to happen in Ohio. Ohio is a hotbed of anti-black racism, so these two sleazebags chose their target well. Unfortunately for them, their guy lost the election, and they wound up having to plead to felony telecommunications fraud. That was last year. The FCC also said they were looking into whether to hit these two up for $5 million in fines. But it didn't stop there. They were also sued by civil rights lawyers in federal court for being in violation of the Voting Rights Act, the Civil Rights Act, and the Ku Klux Klan Act of 1871. The judge on that case felt the evidence was so overwhelming as to their liability that he didn't even bother to impanel a jury to hear the case. The judge simply ruled on it himself and found them liable. There's no news as yet on what the damages are going to be, though it seems the plaintiffs in that case are going to have to get in line. Because remember how I said the FCC was considering whether to fine these two $5 million for their illegal stunt? Well, astonishingly, just 2 weeks ago, the FCC put out a press release saying they unanimously decided to hit Wohl and Berkman for $5.13 million in fines. The press release also said that if these two don't pay up, the FCC will refer the matter to the Justice Department for collections. How ironic, or rather typical, these two were trying to intimidate black people with phony messages about black folks being handed over for debt collection, and now here they are, looking at a real debt collection. Well, Jacob Wohl's family ought to be familiar with this situation, so he should feel right at home. Jacob Wohl and his buddy Berkman are what you call the incompetent operative class. They're the keystone cops of political operations. They're just ambitious enough to work to attack their political opponents, but too dumb to come up with something that actually does work. Wohl himself was mentioned on white cable TV for a little while, and he even posted a video of various TV and internet personalities saying his name as they reported on his latest acts of idiocy. You see, people like Wohl and Berkman think that getting attention and winning are the same thing, and they're not. Christopher Rufo also falls into this category. Rather than do something intelligent, these guys just do something, and because they're driven by trying to be trending, and to them that's what determines whether something is a good idea or not, they wind up doing things and pushing ideas that damage the very causes they claim to be championing. Christopher Rufo was the main one pushing dumb Santis to pass all those trolling laws like Stop Woke, etc. And while it got him on Fox News, it also made DeSantis radioactive to the very centrist voters that he won't be able to get the nomination without, and certainly won't be able to get the presidency without. Florida is not America, any more than California is the United States. That's the problem these GOPers don't want to have to face up to because their base desperately demands that they tell them that they are the end-all and be-all. And that's who they have to cater to. So as a result, DeSantis has solidified his image as a bona fide right-wing nut. And because Fox News and right-wing hate radio has conditioned their degenerate base to demand ever-increasing acts of racism and extremism, people like Rufo have been so busy trying to top the last stupid stunt they pulled rather than realize they were making their would-be benefactors unelectable. Instead, he tripled down on stupid. Hey, but at least he got a token make-work job on the board of Florida's new college, right? Yeah, it's trolling and no, it doesn't accomplish anything, but Rufo has no other options. He's cursed to ride this sinking ship to the bottom of the ocean. But whereas Rufo at least had someone stupid enough to actually offer him a job, Wohl and Berkman, on the other hand, don't even have that much. So as they saw it, there was no downside to breaking laws flagrantly and doing anything to get attention, but they didn't have anything else going. There's a lot more that these two clowns have been involved in, but I think this pretty much illustrates who and what they are. Now, you might be wondering what these two have to do with anything. Well, let me ask you, given what you now know about them, what kind of person would willfully want to be in the same room with these two? Who would actually want to be around these two creeps? Well, as it turned out, there were some people of color who decided they wanted to be around them. And that brings us to Mr. Deelip Mahaska. Mr. Mahaska feebly tries to make himself seem like he's just a guy who likes to support political disruptors and outsiders, as if he's not a political partisan. But that's not true. One of his main social proofs that he tries to point to prove that he's not a political partisan is that he shook hands with Bill Clinton once. And while he claims to have supported Barack Obama, all he did was allegedly work on Obama's campaign team in 2012. And 2012 is an important year because that was the year that Mahaska was allowed to come from India and to be able to enroll in Harvard Business School. So he clearly was hoping that he could play off of the fact that Barack Obama was also a Harvard alumni. Trying to finesse himself in administration position is what he was trying to do. Remember, that's why people like Simone Sanders and Karine Stank-Pierre and these other bootlicks are so eager to get on these political campaigns. They want to go from being a campaign staffer to being an administration staffer. I think this was Mahaska's real game, but it didn't happen. So 4 years later, on a dime, he turned and joined the Trump campaign. Yeah, the same Donald Trump who was racially denigrating Obama with the whole birtherism thing, but Mahaska didn't seem to mind. He was part of the Trump Tower head office team, and that was what got him invited to Trump's inauguration, which seems to be his main bragging point. This guy will ingratiate himself with whomever he thinks will be able to help him in the moment. When he gets to the U.S., he's desperate for opportunities, so he takes full advantage of the opportunities black people made possible for him. He plays the part of being a person of color until he sees a chance to get something from the other political team. Candace Owens did the same thing, by the way. She was critical of the conservative movement at first when she initially started posting blogs and such, but when they offered her a check, she's since been their biggest bootlicking, butt-kissing fangirl. It's all a finesse, family. But Mahaska also was hoping to get something for India as well. He said, quote, Trump seems to be a better choice for international relationship, especially with India. I am hopeful of U.S. supporting India's bid to bag membership in the UN Security Council. This guy has also been featured on Indian news websites, talking about things like ending caste discrimination. But given the way this guy has moved in the U.S. in the short time that he's been here, I think the only reason he opposes caste discrimination is because he's not a Brahmin, which is the highest caste in India. It's like white liberals in the U.S. who go on and on about class warfare and class struggle. These white liberals are aspiring members of the elite. They don't mind white supremacy. They just don't like their place in it. And I would bet this is the case with Mahaska too. Alright, so what ties the incompetent Trump fanboy Jacob Wohl together with the self-serving sycophant Deelip Mahaska? In 2019, Mahaska was working with a group called TANA. It means Telugu Association of North America. The Telugu are an Indian ethnic group. Since this Mahaska guy had worked for Trump's campaign and even managed to get himself invited to Trump's inaugural in 2017, he was hoping he could get Trump to come to this group's 2019 conference. So he reached out to Trump's 2020 re-election campaign, and he was told that Trump could attend for a modest fee of $3 million. To me, that rate does seem a little bit overinflated, especially since, according to CBS Texas, back in 2018, a year before Mahaska tried to get Trump to attend that conference, the rates to attend a fundraising dinner with Trump started at $2,700 to attend the dinner reception only. A single person could attend the dinner for $35,000, but that's all you got, no VIP seating, no interaction with President Trump. A couple could attend for $50,000, but with the same restrictions. Now, if you wanted to actually meet Trump and get a picture with him, that would cost you $50,000 for a single person and $100,000 for a couple. By the way, those figures are pretty much in line with what Barack Obama was charging at the same time. But still, even ex-presidents don't get paid $3 million just to attend a conference or to give a speech. Obama gets $400,000 per speaking engagement, though according to Sky News, Obama made a 2-stop tour to Australia back in March. He got paid over $500,000 per stop. So, why did Trump's campaign even demand $3 million from these guys? Because clearly the Trump campaign got tired of Mr. Mahaska just like Obama's campaign did, and he couldn't get anyone to return his phone calls. Trump didn't want anything to do with Mahaska or his group, so this was his way of saying you have to pay me a king's ransom to get me in the same room with you people. So here's my question for black folks, especially the ones who are hoping to put together some sort of cross-racial alliance. If this TANA group had been able to get Trump to attend, or if they'd even been able to speak to him over Zoom, what do you think the context of the conversation would have been? Do you think they would have been talking about black people at all? Do you think that there would have been any talk about disadvantaged communities and what about the black community, all that? You think they would have done that? Or do you think it would have been a straight, single, what are the Telugu people going to get? Here's what we want. We need some tangibles for us. We need India on the UN Security Council. Do you think that's what it would have been? Because I think we can all guess what it actually would have been. Though Mr. Mahaska was in quite a fix at the time, oh, what is an aspiring clout chaser to do? Now, you have a large number of people from the Indian American community, like Dinesh D'Souza and Vivek Ramaswamy and others, who attack the black community as not working hard and there's something wrong with black people and, oh, look at these immigrants over here, etc., etc. Well, that being the case, you would think that as hard-working, successful, and singularly industrious as immigrants like Mahaska are, it should have been no problem for them to raise that kind of money. As the white media constantly states, Asians are the fastest growing demographic in the U.S. and in terms of income, well above average. So $3 million should have been pretty straightforward to acquire. Only they couldn't. They raised, according to Mahaska, several $100,000, but that was it. And it was nowhere near enough. As doggedly determined as Mahaska was to get Trump to this conference, I have to wonder if maybe he told his folks that he was some sort of big shot with the campaign, that he had worked for the Trump campaign and gotten invited to the inaugural so he could call up the president anytime he wanted. Because it sure seems like that might have been what he told them. With his ego, if not reputation on the line, Mahaska desperately began to make phone calls to see if there was anyone who could put in the good word for him and get a discount from Trump. He contacted one of Trump's social media coordinators because personal messaging people on Twitter was the closest he could get to Trump, and this social media coordinator recommended Jacob Wohl, because Wohl had trended a few times on Twitter, and because this media coordinator said Wohl had claimed to be really good friends with the Trump family. Now I ask you, who could argue with credentials like that? Mahaska reached out to Jacob Wohl, who was only too happy to help. That is, help himself to Mahaska's money. Jacob Wohl said he could get Trump to attend, and he could even get Charlie Kirk to come out too. You know who Charlie Kirk is, the well-known racist right-wing podcaster. Now, remember, Mahaska has claimed to be politically neutral, more or less. He's not some hardcore ideologue, so why was it that he was so eager to get this famous right-wing racist there like Donald Trump and Charlie Kirk? After all, this guy is supposed to oppose caste discrimination, right? And why would this Mahaska character think that a right-wing racist like Charlie Kirk, who has excoriated Asians countless times, would want to talk to an Asian conference anyway? Better yet, why would they even want to talk with him? Perhaps it's because, as Mahaska sees it, they all agree when it comes to their attitudes on race. Anyway, Jacob Wohl said that he could arrange for both Trump and Kirk to come to the TANA conference, and all it would cost Mahaska is a mere $100,000. Half to be paid up front, and the other half to be paid when Trump and Kirk come to the conference. Mahaska agreed and immediately wired Wohl $50,000. Well, you can probably guess what happened next. According to Mahaska, Jacob Wohl kept telling him that it was all a done deal, and on the date that the conference was supposed to take place in D.C., Jacob Wohl assured Mahaska that Trump and Kirk would be arriving soon. Except that Mahaska saw a picture of Trump on Instagram that morning golfing in Cape Cod, so it was obvious that Trump was nowhere near D.C. Jacob Wohl told Mahaska that he would have to talk to his so-called team and try to see what's going on. Surely there's a reasonable explanation for this. After that, Wohl stopped answering Mahaska's calls. Mahaska demanded his money back, but it wasn't until they got in touch with Jacob Wohl's father that some of the money finally began to move. Though at last report, Wohl still owes Mahaska $20,000, allegedly. Mahaska said he hadn't done any real digging into Jacob Wohl's background until after he got swindled. Well, nice to see he put that Harvard Business School degree to good use. He doesn't do any due diligence until after the fact. I wonder if that's what they were teaching at Harvard. Of course, as we all know, most of the students at these Ivy League schools are there strictly to network. They're not learning anything. They party, hang out, smoke weed, and brag that they went to an Ivy League school. It's all about connections. So Mahaska, the Ivy League educated smart guy, got taken by a two-bit con man who, if he had taken just a few seconds on Google, he would have known to avoid. And he got swindled using the most pig-simple, basic, obvious scam. I don't feel sorry for him. He thought that he was making inroads to MAGA world, and he wanted Charlie Kirk to be there, so that tells you everything you need to know about Mahaska and the white right. This guy, like so many of these other white supremacist adjacent people and groups, he wanted to be on Team White Supremacy. Now, am I supposed to feel sorry for him because his plan didn't work out? And remember, he was doing this on behalf of an entire group of like-minded people who had already ponied up several hundreds of thousands of dollars to try to get Trump to come talk to them. So he's not alone. This was just like Steve Bannon's Build the Wall scam. And these are people who the white media would call people of color who were doing this, but look at what they put their money together to try to do. What Mahaska and his pals were trying to do was to have it both ways, and it's nothing new. We see it a lot, particularly from Latin America. People who identify as white on their driver's licenses and job applications and everything else, but they will call themselves people of color when white power has its foot on their throats. White supremacy believes in taking both sides of the conversation, and these white supremacist adjacent entities also practice the same thing. But what black people are going to have to internalize is that talk is cheap. Action is what matters. A lot of people try to say one thing and do the other. So how do you tell the difference? Follow the money, and you'll find the truth. Good evening, and be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors. Codified Trucking, Damian Bryson, Onan Smith, Plasticizer, and Delvian Burton. Salute to them and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.